Hello and welcome to today's webinar series. It's actually a full day of 4 series. We hope you'll check in with us from throughout the day. On the hour, we're going to just change topics, and want to first begin by introducing myself. My name's Joshua Levy. I'll be one of today's moderators of the webinars of How to Write a Better Narrative, and we're going to dive deep into the narrative. I am, as you see up on the panel discussion webinar, I'm accompanied by virtually here, as well as person who wasn't able to make it today, over 100 years of experience in the EMS healthcare field. So it is going to be a great presentation. Before we begin, I want to do a couple housekeeping things and share with you. This is a live broadcast. Our webinar portal is similar to other webinar portals where you have the live broadcast viewing section, and below you have the ability to submit questions. We would like to make this workshop webinar as interactive as possible, so feel free to submit questions, comments, thoughts, praises, whatever you'd like throughout the webinar, and then at the end we will have a 20-minute section dedicated just to Q&A. So by getting some representation from the audience, please, just to show you're out there, submit who you are and where you're from. As you know, there's some severe weather going on in St. Louis, and as I introduce our panel, you'll understand why one of our panelists couldn't make it today. But please submit, just so we know you're out there, who you are, and let me know where you're from. So in our first of 4-part webinar series, we're going to talk about how to write a better narrative. We're going to talk about the basics, the grammar, the legibility, and how important a good narrative is to the entire report done by the paramedic. I myself have very little to no experience, so we've equipped panelists of lots of experience. As I said at the beginning, there's over 100 years of experience amongst our panelists, minus one representative, and I'll talk about him first. Philip Goggin was he actually founded Narrative Pro Writing Solutions and has been a paramedic for over 25 years. Due to the weather in St. Louis, hopefully he's staying as safe as possible and keeping other people as safe as well. But going from, I've got to do this from your view, from your right to left, Lynn Thompson with AMB. Lynn, give us a little bit about your background and share with the audience, and just say hello and get everybody warmed up.
Okay, thanks, Josh. I am a 39-year veteran of fire and EMS, starting all the way with as an ambulance driver and working my way up through EMS as EMT, paramedic, going to the city of Memphis and spending 25 years as a firefighter paramedic, and moving then into EMS education and also as an RN. And I've transitioned from that position when I retired to EMS director, and then from that position to what I am now with AMB, or Ambulance Medical Billing, as the EMS operations training consultant. And I'm very glad to be here with you today.
Awesome, and thank you. And sitting to his right, or on your audience, maybe your left, is Phil Sanderson. Phil Sanderson is in charge of the sales for Narrative Pro and has more than 27 years of experience in the healthcare field. Is also a John Maxwell certified coach. And Phil, tell us some more, and I'm going to thank you guys both for coming. So
thank you so much. So my name is Philip Sanderson. I have over 27 years in healthcare, EMS, and during that tenure, I think I've done a little bit of every aspect, from the field, from being in training, from being in administration. Now currently I have my own company, consulting company, and quite honestly, one of the solutions that I'm providing to the EMS industry is Narrative Pro, because as the folks out there will probably agree with, we have a lot of issues with documentations and a lot of issues with reimbursement. There's a huge cost, and that's a problem. So I'm hoping that this solution that was developed by Philip Goggin, he can't be here today, will definitely add value to the folks that are in the industry. So glad to be here today.
Wonderful. And as the audience may or may not know, we're broadcasting live from St. Louis, Missouri in Medici's media space. And these gentlemen were kind enough to come to Nashville. You're going to hear, we got to, go ahead.
Well,
let us have it. Let us have it.
So I think it's very fitting that it's a very blue, rainy, dark day in St. Louis. The rivers are flowing backwards, and there's roads that are closed, and the The Predators beat the Blues, the Black and Blues. So we got to rub it in. So
Yeah, so if I volunteer it, it's not rubbing in as much, and as our audience, you're not going to get any fans in St. Louis talking like that, Phil. So this is being broadcasted across the country, but there's a little bit of a rivalry going on between Nashville and St. Louis as we speak. Series, we're down 3-1, but hopefully we can come back. So all good.
probably not.
So enough with the chit chat. We're going to get started. As I have said a couple of times now, Phil Goggin could not make it here. So Phil Sanderson stepping up to the plate and doing the first of our 4-part series, the good, the bad, and the really bad about narrative. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Phil.
Okay, thanks so much. So again, Philip Goggin did prepare this presentation, but Lynn and I are going to step in on his behalf. We are going to just talk about the basics. I'm sure there's a lot of experienced people out there, but as we all know, if you do not build upon the basics and the foundations, then the rest of the house, so to speak, is going to crumble. So let's just kind of review. If this is a review for you, just bear with us. But if it's your first time getting into the industry, I think you'll find this informative. So Lynn and I are talking together, and okay. So Lynn, let's talk about this. Why should we even write a narrative? I know, a long time ago, in your 30 years and my 27 years, we got into this, and probably everybody out there in the audience, we wanted to take care of our community, our patients, our loved ones. But now it's really gotten to be much more than just taking care of a patient.
Well, you're absolutely correct, Phil, in that we need to write a good narrative for, as the clip shows here, legal documentation, billing, reimbursement documentation, or CQI, or continuous quality improvement outline to give us, the issues of why do we protect ourselves legally, how do we get more reimbursement through our documentation, and then how do we improve ourselves through the CQI outline.
Absolutely, very good. So, also too, we have
and Phil and Lynn, I wasn't going to interject, but that first slide was a perfect opportunity for me to interject as a novice, no experience. I got to believe that writing the narrative has to be on the top 10 of least favorite things for a paramedic to do.
You know what? It is absolutely the pain of most EMTs and paramedics. I would probably say the majority. And it's like I said, we got into this to take care of a patient. We got into this to be able to deliver care, and not necessarily to be able to be a good documenter or writer, but it's so imperative that we do that now. And quite honestly, that's one of the highlights that I love about Narrative Pro. I mean, when Philip Goggin sat down and he had this forethought, he put a lot of detail in it that takes that pain away from those EMTs and paramedics. And certainly we're going to show some of that here shortly.
Sorry for the distraction.
No, that's a great question. Great question. So there are the legal aspects of your documentation. And, unfortunately, we live in a time and place where people want to come back and challenge us on the things that we may not have done correctly. And, maybe there's a time and a place for that. But, if we make mistakes, the attorneys out there, and nothing against attorneys, I've done some expert reviews in my previous as well, but they're going to find those mistakes. And if we're not careful in our documentation, they're going to find those misspelled words, those grammatical errors, maybe some of those details that just didn't make sense. Because quite honestly, at 2 o'clock in the morning, when you have transported a lot of patients, and Lynn, being from Memphis Fire Department, my goodness, I can imagine, you're mentally just not with it. So you're gonna forget things. So very important that you take the time, you're very slow about writing your narrative, and you get it all down there, because 10 years from now, that's, from a legal perspective, that's really could cost you or could not cost you.
And Phil, the one thing I always say when I'm teaching and training personnel is the thing for a legal aspect of it is your narrative is your armor to protect you. And what you want to do is make sure that your armor is in good shape, Josh, and that there's no cracks in it, no chinks, as they say. Because that's what attorneys going to do. They're going to find that little chink, they're going to open it up, and they're going to utilize that against you for their client in whatever way they need to. So it's an armor. It protects you.
And I would say, based on what you're saying, this is, you said take your time, and you even said go slow to get the narrative right. This is one area where the paramedic does have to, it's a fast-paced job. They got to slow down to get it right.
Absolutely. And then, now, going back to what we've said a couple of times already in this short time we've been here, it's much more than taking care of a patient, because there is a cost to this industry. And, with the high cost and the low reimbursements and the margins being very narrow, it's important that we have the billing aspects. And companies like AMB, Ambulance Medical Billing, and there are others out there too, definitely are taking charge and leading the way and helping us to get those reimbursements.
Well, what I'm telling our clients is, billing and reimbursement for EMS has become very specialized. It's not the days of old where you're just in the building and get paid. You have to make sure that you're meeting all of the billing compliance issues that's set forth by Medicare. And that's why and they require a good narrative, because that's where the tell the story portion comes of to get you reimbursed. Does this person need an ambulance, and do they need a stretcher? We have to tell the story. And the checkoff boxes are all just supportive pieces of information to go along with that. And that's one of the things we haven't taught that in the past, of why do we have to write such a narrative? Well, that's what the billing people look at when they're reading it to say, okay, whether I'm going to pay this or not. So again, it goes back to, we have to have a good, strong narrative for legal and billing processes.
That's a very good point. We don't want to tell our age, but we're kind of old. I'm not as old as you are, but but when we started out in the industry, and probably there are some very experienced folks out there in the audience, we were writing on a paper ticket, and we came out with the wonderful thing of EPCRs, where we had drop-down boxes, and we thought that was the save-all. Well, what we're finding now is that we're doing good on the drop-down boxes, but we're doing very, very poorly in the narrative, and that's what's really important when you come to the aspects of documentation, the medical record, the continuity of care, telling the story, as you mentioned, and then also too, not just from the legal, but from the billing aspects, because we got to get reimbursed, because if we don't, then we're not going to be in business. And unfortunately, we used to not associate our EMS industry with business, but it really is. It's becoming a business now, and it has to be sustainable. So good point there. So also too, with our documentation, our billing, comes our CQI, and it's very important that we have a CQI program within our organization, and just simply keeps us on our toes. It improves our patient care through review of our records, and also too helps to keep our spelling and grammar in check. It helps to do training for areas that maybe we're not as efficient in, or maybe we're lacking, and just doing a really good follow-up. So spelling and grammar is one of those things that we really probably, I don't know, from a billing perspective, we're probably doing better now, because now that we have spell check in our EPCRs and we have more technology, versus when we had our paper tickets, we might have to carry around a little field guide or a dictionary, or maybe we just didn't really care and we just misspelled a word. But it's very easy, as the examples that Philip Goggin included in his presentation, it's very easy to misspell a word, and not intentionally, or even in a medication. Now, of course, medication error, that's a whole different section that we can talk about, but it's very important.
Well, from the legal aspect, excuse me, from the legal aspect especially, because the lawyer's going to take what you actually put down there, and that's what they're going to say, okay, this is what you did, because that's why we wrote it. So as you see, anywhere from splinting versus splitting can be an extremity. There's two different wording. While it's easily done at 4 in the morning, believe me, I know, or in medication errors, that's extremely important. And from 0.4 milligrams versus 4 milligrams, we very much have to make sure it's appropriately documented.
Absolutely.
I am glad you guys brought up that as a specific example, because in the back of my head, I'm going as a patient, or a father of a patient, I'm thinking, I don't really care about the grammar, you just saved my life, right? But from a billing and from a legal perspective, a typo a misspelled word like that could be dramatic.
Especially if you've had an adverse outcome with the patient. This is what's going to support what you did at the time of the incident.
Right.
So
right.
adverse outcome, they're looking for anything, and the grammar and spelling is just a sign of sloppiness.
It's
Sloppiness is a sign of sloppy work,
Absolutely,
and it may lead
Josh.
to some negativity.
Yeah, and you're spot on. And actually, I think it's going to be in the third series of this webinar, we're going to actually have a slide. I have a slide in there that actually says exactly what you just said about being sloppy work. And you got to remember, the people, when you're in the legal aspects of this, and even sometimes over in the billing and from an audit perspective, they may not be familiar with your industry or your terminology. So they're just simply reading exactly what you wrote. And if it says, if it doesn't say splinting, then they're going to be going, well, gosh, what does this mean? And they're going to take it for face value. So very important that we check.
Like you said, you've got a slide later on today. I want to remind our audience that we are not just repeating this. We're going to build on this every hour on the hour for the next 2 hours. We're going to take an hour break, and then we're going to come back for after lunch for 2 more hours with a Q&A, a full wrap-up Q&A. So if you have questions, sprinkle them out throughout the presentation. Submit it now. I appreciated Emily and Wendy chiming in and telling them that they're here watching us live today. So we've got a really nice large audience seeing the broadcast. Submit your questions throughout, because we want this to be as interactive as possible with the broadcast.
Yeah, yeah. And just kind of to add to that, the next section will be about reimbursement, and then also we'll follow it up with some legal aspects.
Wonderful.
Good. All right. So narrative writing solutions. There are a lot of solutions out there. Like we said earlier, we started out with the paper tickets, and there probably are still some agencies out there that are still using paper, and that's okay. I would encourage you, if you were to ask my thoughts in best practices, that you consider going to an electronic type of narrative writing tool, and there are some out there. Narrative Pro is one, also being an add-on to your EPCR. But narrative writing solutions, you can do free typing, and free typing maybe in your particular EPCR, excuse me. It's good, but it is time consuming, and you got your drop down boxes, then you got to redo your narrative. It is time consuming. It is easy for errors to pop up there. You get, at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's hard for you to document a lot of information because you're tired, and that's kind of that is a problem. That's a big problem, because you're not telling the story. So that is one solution out there. There is also your narrative auto generators, and there's probably some folks in our audience that are using those. I do know that there are some organizations that cut those features off because of certain issues that we may talk about here. But they are customized, and they are, one touch, easy of use, but they do have somewhat of a lack of information, and they miss some of the key points, and you may be able to talk about that from your perspective on the auto-generated narratives.
Well, the ones that I have seen, is I was never really a fan of, for the fact that being able to edit them was always an issue. Usually it was just locked into whatever the drop-down box was. And it didn't form, to me, a good story. It didn't, in the narrative, it lacked pieces of information that should have been in there, but you had no way of inserting that. So I have not been a fan of those in the past.
Okay. And of course, there's also a nice little tool that we appreciate very much so. It's called Narrative Pro. And I got to tell you, and I'm going to give a shout, I'm not sure if Philip's joining us live or not, but I tell people that I don't think that me personally could have ever really thought of the level of detail that he put into this. And he told me the story and how he was in paramedic school, and he thought, man, there's got to be a solution for this. And he's been in the industry for some years, and he has literally put so much robust information into the program that whenever I'm out talking to people about it, I'm doing trainings, or we're setting up new folks, new customers, I play a little game with them. I challenge them. I say, okay, pick something something that you think might be in a textbook. Let's just get far above your own clinical practice, and let's see if we can find it in Narrative Pro. And I got to tell you, we typically find it there. So Narrative Pro, a great tool. It's an add-on to your EPCR. It combines all of these, all the best of the best. It's quick and easy to complete, and it's compatible with EPCRs. And we're going to show this software in different features as we go through the day. So again, like Josh said, stick with us for that. And is also, it tells the story. And it tells the story not only from a medical record, it tells the story from a billing perspective. And we're going to show those features in the next series. And it also will protect you legally. And it's very, very fast and easy to create this narrative. And Philip and I were talking a few weeks ago, and he was telling me about an unusual call that he had. And he gave I think it was 5 pages of a narrative of a medical record in like less than 20 minutes of his time. Now, I'll be the first one to admit, if you asked me to write 5 pages of a patient care report off of a call, I'd be here for quite a while. Okay, I'm not going to deny that. But as you'll see in this presentation, it's very well formatted, it's nice, it looks good, and it's grammatically correct. You know, spelling is there. So, and Lynn, you're out there, you know, with your company, and we're doing some work together, and you're a big fan, and you recently new to it as well. So, what is your perspective?
Well, Josh, when Philip utilized our friendship to present this, I'm thinking, okay, Philip's coming to me with something new. I'm going to look at it, and we'll move on. As I said, I've not been a fan of the narrative predictive writers and others that I had seen in the past. Not saying they were all bad, but I didn't like them. So Philip brought this to me and said, here, look at it, download it, and present it. So I did. I took time, and right away I realized this is something different. It was a good, detailed writing, and it allowed you to insert or edit the information once you got it written, to add or take away what you didn't like from the drop-down boxes and things. And so since then, I've told Philip, I said, hey, I think you've got a good product here, and I think if you can get it out there to the masses, it'll be good for them, because it's going to protect them legally, and it's going to reinforce the reimbursement process, which is really the key elements here, along with other reasons for documentation.
So it sounds like if you take it through the 2 extremes, the free form being the first one that you talked about, and you can do whatever you want with it, and laziness and not filling in the things appropriately, and spelling, grammar. And then the other extreme would be the auto-generated, that out of the box inside the EPCR report, that, as Lynn, you described it, doesn't give you the flexibility to edit and to really tell a story. Correct. It's more of a, let's CYA, cover our ass as much
absolutely.
as we can. And then this solution kind of brings the best of both worlds.
Absolutely, absolutely. Phenomenal. So, you know, I think if we've got time, Josh, it would be a great time to show a quick little video on Narrative Pro, or the viewers out there could go to narrativepro.com and find more information. Do I have time to show a quick little 3 to 5 video?
We'd love to show the video. It'll also give our audience time to submit some questions during and after the video. We've got some questions already that we'll get to in our Q&A session. So if we're ready, we're going to roll the video here, and you're going to see it on our broadcast.
I've been in EMS for over 12 years now, and in that time I have written a lot of reports, both handwritten and free typed. But one thing always bothered me about those reports: how good is my narrative? The question was, is it going to protect me in court? Is it going to help out with billing? Does it paint that clear picture that I want to see 20 years from now? And I always knew the answer to that: no, it's not good enough. And I knew there had to be a solution. So let's have a look at the software, and I think that you'll agree it's a much more complete system of writing a narrative.
The finished reports are uniform, no matter how the crew member does the reporting. The language used will always be consistent, and the big savings? Time. 10 minutes to complete a full-page report means that your paramedics are quickly back in service, providing patient care, not writing reports. Although the information on our drop-downs have been developed from years of research, every ambulance run may have a unique situation that requires special entries. The beauty of Narrative Pro is that every entry can be overwritten with a unique description. Every detail can be customized as the person creating the report finds necessary. Some other features that our clients appreciate: the reporting flow is chronological. The report is composed starting with the beginning of the run to the end. We were careful to include Medicare and insurance terms to ensure that billing will be the correct language. Your employees are experts in patient care, not experts on insurance claims.
We hope we have your interest in Narrative Pro and that you'd like to get started. We offer a free 20-day, no-obligation trial complete with setup and support. It's the best way for you to see what our advanced narrative writing system is all about. You'll find the cost of Narrative Pro becomes a small investment when you start to realize the savings in time and the increased revenue from billing accuracy.
I've been in this business for 30 years, and that's been a big problem during that time, was legibility, and especially when you're trying to bill somebody for a service you performed, and everybody has different handwriting, especially me. I have the worst in the world, and you can actually read the reports, and the reports make sense. We've seen the benefit of increased revenue from it too. In 2010, we had about $65,000 in insurance revenue, and it increased to about $119,000 in 2011.
We've seen a marked reduction in rejections from insurance and Medicare and Medicaid, and the crews enjoy using it because it does make their narratives quite more in-depth, and it eases their pain of having to come up with a narrative on their own. Having fewer rejections means you're not having to deal with the insurance companies and trying to rewrite narratives or resubmit billing, which all cost money, and the revenue generated from it certainly doesn't hurt.
Born from experience, solving the everyday problems of narrative reporting. Narrative Pro, your best choice for the efficient use of your daily history that is such an important part of your operation.
And I find it interesting is it possible to over-document?
Well, I think we can answer that question with one of those yes and no's. So I would say that no, yes, it is possible to over-document if you document things like frustrations and finger pointings and things that are just not factual in your documents. So you want to refrain for those, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But for the framing of the question, you can really never document too much, because you want to document for factual information that took place on the call, from prior to the call to the handoff to the ED. You want to document every event that happened. If things were quoted to you, you want to put those in quotations, by whom, and you want to tell the story, paint the story, so that if a person that is not in medical industry sat down and read it, it would be almost like a book to them, and a novel, so to speak. So Lynn, what are your thoughts?
Well, you're absolutely right. The over-documentation can be done through opinions, sarcasm, whatever that I have seen through reviews that people input, because they are frustrated for some of the calls they make. You have to be professional at all times and maintain that level in your writing as well, because you don't want those things pulled up in court or in a reviewer at some point and them reading it, because they're reading you as a professional. So yes, you can over-document with those types of things, but if you're doing factual, patient-based information, then it's hard to do, as long as that's what the writing is toward.
And I would just like to add to that too. It's really okay to document more than 3 or 4 or 5 lines. You really should document everything from A to Z. It should be, so many times we get caught up in just a few lines, and quite honestly, that's just not enough. So you need to tell the story from start to finish. Be very descriptive and informative and non-opinionated.
And here's great answer, guys. And here is a question, and just so you know, I'm not being rude, checking my phone while you guys are answering. I'm checking my phone for questions from the audience. So please submit your question from the audience. Here's what: services using manual reports for many years are reluctant to change. How do you get everybody to get on board with a solution, of whether it be going to an EPCR or going to a narrative writing tool like Narrative Pro?
You want to take that,
Well,
or you
I'll
want me
start
to?
off and then
Okay.
let you finish up. Change is always difficult for all of us. One of the things I always tell people when I'm teaching is the only person that likes change, Josh, is a baby with a dirty diaper. So change is difficult and going from writing, but we need to be progressive and moving forward within our industry. And in the industry, there's 5 reasons we document: patient care, QA process, data collection, liability, and then reimbursement. Well, specifically for data collection, QI process, to go back even in a small department and review those to collect that information is next to impossible, and it's not going to be accurate. So we need to move into the 21st century. We need to be doing, electronic patient care records, or as we call them now, electronic health records, EHRs. And the only way we can do that is by making that progressive step of moving to a PCR electronically.
And
And
that's,
Lynn, before we turn that, you can follow up, just repeat those 5 reasons. That was awesome, and if you could
Okay.
repeat
The
that,
Okay, I'm sorry.
no worries.
Okay, the 5 reasons we document is patient care, QA process, data collection, liability, and reimbursement. And those all are very important parts of our documentation process, and some of them totally depend, especially data collection, on the being able to capture it from PCR and electronically.
And do you have a 6th?
Yeah.
Can carry on to that.
well, I don't know that I have a 6 to that, but I will add to what Lynn said. I look at it like this, and a very good illustration about change. But here's the fact. We're almost 45 years in EMS industry, if I'm correct, this year. Very young industry in the healthcare field, profession. But here's the fact. If we don't change, then we don't grow, okay? And if we don't grow, we die, okay? And, we have moved away from, or we need to be trying to move away from the paper, writing, because now we're in an information age, we're in a technology state. And, with healthcare, we got to try to find some continuity of medical records, and that's a whole nother discussion that we could get into. But when we're working with agencies, or for the person asking the question, here's the fact: everything worthwhile is uphill. Unfortunately, we all have downhill habits, and we just don't want to change sometimes. But it comes to a time and place where we really have to. We need to get into the times. If you're on paper right now, I will tell you, and I feel very confident that myself or someone else, not necessarily me or Lynn, could sit down with you and show you the ROI, the return on your investment, how you can increase your revenues and decrease your liabilities by going to an electronic system. It doesn't have to be necessarily Narrative Pro. There's a lot of them out there, but just simply making that transition to an electronic feature.
That is great, and we have time for one more question, because we're going to be going into our next hour. It's going to cover some new topics. It's going to rehash some of the old ones, and we're going to take on new questions for our new audience. So feel free to submit your questions. We'll get to them throughout the day if we don't get to them in this hour block. Just time for one last question, and it's a simple one. But what exactly, we hear narrative, what exactly is a narrative, and how does it fit into the medical record?
Well, the narrative is, the narrative is, like we've talked about, telling the story. It is the medical record. It is the happening, so to speak, when that person calls 911, or if they're calling for a routine transport, for the EMT or paramedic to pick them up, to drop them off. As if you go to a doctor's office, or your clinic down the street, they're going to do a documentation based on what happened in that visit. Well, in the EMS industry, it's no different. There has to be documentation of what happened during that interaction, during that visit, and then it needs to be transferred over to the ED or to the nursing staff at the skilled facility or wherever it may be, so that you have a continuity of care, because it truly is a part of the medical record. And sometimes we don't always think about this, but you know, weeks or months or years down the road, should the patient have some sort of terminal illness or develop something unusual, then the physician needs to be able to pull up the medical record, and that ambulance narrative should be in there, and it should also be a part of the puzzle to help maybe develop some type of cure or care for this patient.
Absolutely. It's just the narrative is the portion of the PCR, Josh, that is your description, your story of what happened from the time you were dispatched on the call throughout that portion to what you have found as you arrived on the scene, not only just the patient, but what's happening around the patient, if there's other things that are significant. And then what you see, the presentation and the appearance of the patient. Then you move into your assessment portion of it, writing it out in description. And then, you know, your treatment and their response, you know, other portions, vital signs, pain scale, you know, Glasgow Coma Scale, or, you know, those different pieces are all a written description by you, the provider. Then your transfer of the patient to the hospital, your handoff at the hospital, and then in service. It's just a total written story.
And Lynn, on a 1 to 10 scale, from an outsourced billing perspective, how important is the narrative?
Very important. It's a 10.
10. Well, you've heard it here first. This will wrap up our first 1 hour. It's actually not an hour, but we need to take a 5 to 10 minute break to prepare for our next hour. We hope you'll either take a break with us and come back and tune in. We will try to start on time at 10:30 Central Time, so that'll give us about a 10-minute break with a little 5-minute setup. We hope to see you guys then.